Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we will find out who KeyFace is. One of the most terrifying, enigmatic, and complex creatures within the Insidious universe is, without a doubt, KeyFace. He is not just a malevolent entity lurking in the shadows of the further, but a representation of the deepest fears: the loss of control, absolute oppression, and imposed silence. Unlike other beings that seek to possess bodies or spread chaos, this demon takes pleasure in silencing, subjugating, and imprisoning souls, turning them into prisoners of his dark domain. That is why, in this video, I will explain in detail the story of KeyFace. To do so, I will summarize his origins and how he connects to the different movies. Then, I will discuss his physical appearance, personality, and his incredible abilities and known weaknesses. KeyFace's story begins with Elise Rainier in 1953, when she was still a child, living with her family in an old house in Five Keys, New Mexico. Her home was located next to a prison where her father, Gerald Rainier, worked as a prison guard. Life in the house was not easy, as Gerald was a strict, authoritarian, and violent man, especially toward Elise, whom he considered a problematic child due to her strange ability to see and communicate with spirits. Her mother, Audrey Rainier, on the other hand, was a kind and understanding woman who believed in her daughter's gifts. She told Elise that these abilities were a gift and not a curse. However, Elise always lived in fear, as her father did not tolerate any fantasy related to the supernatural and would punish her severely whenever she mentioned seeing something unusual. One night, while sleeping in her room, Elise began to hear whispers coming from the dark hallways of the house. When she woke up, she saw a shadow moving in the corner of her room. Although she felt fear, she was also inexplicably drawn to the presence. Without hesitation, she followed the whispers into the hallway, where she saw a spectral figure. "Open it," the spirit said in a trembling voice. Frightened yet curious, the girl followed the call to the basement, where her father kept tools and old objects. At that moment, Elise saw a red door locked with a key. Without fully understanding what she was doing, she reached out and turned the handle, releasing something that should never have been set free: KeyFace. As soon as the door opened, a dark energy flooded the basement. A cold wind swept through the house, making the lights flicker. Elise felt a shiver run down her spine, and suddenly, a tall and slender silhouette emerged from the darkness. It was a monstrous creature with pale skin, long claws, and fingers ending in sharp metallic keys. The demon approached Elise and, with a swift movement, placed one of its keys on the girl's throat, sealing her voice and leaving her completely paralyzed. In that moment, something evil entered her body. The demon had begun to possess her. Her eyes turned completely black, and her body trembled. From the upper floor, Audrey sensed that something was wrong and rushed downstairs to the basement. She found her daughter in a trance, staring blankly. Realizing what was happening, she called out desperately, trying to wake Elise from the possession. Elise, still under the demon's control, lifted her gaze and, in a distorted voice, said, "It's not me." At that moment, unable to control herself, Elise grabbed a metal object and, with a sudden movement, killed her own mother. The woman fell lifeless to the ground while KeyFace faded into the shadows, satisfied with the tragedy he had caused. The scream of Christian, Elise's younger brother, shattered the silence of the night. The boy had witnessed the horror and was completely frozen in fear. Gerald, upon seeing his wife dead and Elise standing beside the body, assumed that his daughter was responsible. Blinded by hatred and rage, he dragged her into a dark room and beat her brutally with a cane, demanding that she confess what she had done. Through tears, Elise tried to explain what had really happened, but her father did not believe her. From that night on, the beatings and abuse became constant every time she mentioned anything paranormal. Years later, as a teenager, Elise decided she could no longer endure it. One night, She packed her things and ran away from home, leaving behind her brother Christian, who felt abandoned by his sister. This was the beginning of Elise Rainier's journey as a wandering medium, trying to use her gift to help others while escaping her own past. But what she never imagined was that, decades later, that past would come back to haunt her. After escaping her home in 5 Keys, Elise Rainier began a nomadic life, moving from place to place with no fixed destination. Although her childhood was marked by terror and abuse, she knew that her gift was not a curse, but a tool she could use to help others. Over the years, Elise perfected her ability to communicate with the dead, becoming a professional medium. Throughout her journey, she helped many families understand and face paranormal phenomena, though deep down, she always feared returning to the further, the mysterious spiritual plane that connected the living with the most terrifying entities. However, her gift also made her vulnerable. On several occasions, she unknowingly opened doors to the further, allowing malevolent beings to cross into the world of the living. This fear led her to become more selective about the cases she accepted. Despite her talent, her life was filled with loneliness and guilt. She never sought out her brother Christian again, fearing that her presence would only cause him more pain. Over time, her abilities led her to meet Carl, a fellow medium and friend with whom she shared experiences about the paranormal world. Together, they tried to better understand the further and its rules, but many of their questions remained unanswered. Decades passed, and Elise continued working in the paranormal field until a traumatic event drove her to completely abandon her work as a medium. In one particularly terrifying case, a demonic entity attacked her with such ferocity that she swore never to use her abilities again. This demon, later known as the Bride in Black, nearly killed her while she was trying to help a family in danger. For the first time in her life, Elise felt absolute terror. She decided to shut her mind off from the further and live a normal life, trying to ignore the existence of spirits. She moved into a modest house and spent years in isolation, avoiding any contact with the paranormal. Years later, Elise was living alone when a young girl named Quinn Brenner arrived at her doorstep. Quinn, a teenager who had recently lost her mother, wanted to contact her spirit and believed Elise could help. Although she initially refused, Elise felt sympathy for the girl and agreed to hold a seance to communicate with her mother. During the session, Elise entered the further, and at first, everything seemed calm. However, something went wrong. While trying to find Quinn's mother's spirit, Elise felt a malevolent presence lurking nearby. Suddenly, a tall figure dressed in a filthy hospital gown and wearing a black oxygen mask emerged from the darkness. This entity was the man who can't breathe, an evil spirit that had inhabited the building where Quinn lived. The entity attacked Elise violently, forcing her to retreat from the further. Frightened and feeling that her life was in danger, Elise warned Quinn not to attempt to contact her mother again and told her to stay away from the paranormal. The experience left Elise shaken, reminding her of the dangers of opening portals to the further. Despite Elise's warning, Quinn continued trying to reach her mother, which led to the man who can't breathe attacking and possessing her. Desperate, her father, Sean Brenner, sought help, and that was when Specs and Tucker appeared, 2 paranormal investigators who would later become Elise's assistants. Eventually, Elise realized that she could no longer ignore her gift and decided to return to the fight against malevolent spirits. She once again entered the further and confronted the man who can't breathe, successfully freeing Quinn from his control. At that moment, Elise regained her confidence and decided that her destiny was to help both the living and the dead, no matter the danger it posed. After this case, Elise partnered with Specs and Tucker, forming her team of paranormal investigators. Together, they began traveling, helping people with supernatural problems. After years of helping others with paranormal problems, Elise Rainier never imagined that her most personal case would take her back to where it all began, her childhood home in Five Keys, New Mexico. One night, she received a call from a man named Ted Garza, who claimed that his house was infested with spirits and that objects were moving on their own. At first, Elise didn't want to accept the case, but when Ted mentioned his address, a chill ran down her spine. It was her old house, the same place where her mother had died and where her father had punished her for years. The medium knew that something bigger was at play. It was no coincidence that this place continued to attract dark forces. So, with a mix of fear and determination, she accepted the case and headed to Five Keys, accompanied by her loyal companions, Specs and Tucker. Upon arrival, Elise immediately felt the oppression of the past. The house was nearly intact, though time had worn it down. The walls seemed to absorb the echoes of her childhood, and every corner reminded her of the nights of terror she had endured there. As they stepped inside, Elise felt a presence calling to her from the shadows. With her heart pounding, she explored each room, reliving memories she had tried to forget. When she reached the basement, her breath caught in her throat. There it was, the red door. The same door she had opened as a child. The portal that had unleashed KeyFace. While inspecting the house, Elise began having visions of a woman dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Following her through the hallways, Elise discovered that she was a trapped spirit. The woman pointed to a section of the basement, and when Elise began digging, she unearthed a skeleton buried beneath the floor. At that moment, the house's owner, Ted Garza, appeared, his face filled with panic. Without warning, he pulled out a gun and took everyone hostage. It was then that Elise realized the terrifying truth. Ted was not a victim of the house. He was a killer who had lived there for years. Ted confessed that he had kidnapped and murdered women, burying their bodies within the house. But the most disturbing revelation was that he had not acted alone. A malevolent presence had been influencing him for years, pushing him to commit these crimes. Just as the situation spiraled out of control, Christian Rainier, Elise's brother, arrived at the house with his daughters, Melissa and Imogen. Christian, who still resented Elise for abandoning him in their childhood, didn't understand what was happening. But when he saw his sister in danger, he tried to intervene. In the midst of the chaos, KeyFace appeared. With a swift motion, it extended its sharp fingers and drove one of its keys into Melissa's throat, trapping her soul in the further. Elise knew there was only one way to save her. She had to finally face the demon that had terrorized her since childhood. Without hesitation, Elise plunged into the further, the dark realm of spirits. There, she wandered through a labyrinth of shadows until she found her niece's essence, locked inside a cage. But before she could free her, KeyFace emerged. This time, Elise was not defenseless. She knew that the demon's power came from fear, and that if she faced it without terror, she could weaken it. The demon attacked her viciously, trying to silence her just as it had when she was a child. However, Elise remembered her mother's words, "Your gift is a blessing, not a curse." At that moment, she saw the spirit of her mother, Audrey, who helped her break free from the demon's control. With one final effort, Elise shattered the chains holding Melissa captive, and together they escaped from the further. Back in the real world, Melissa awoke, her soul restored. KeyFace, weakened, was finally defeated and trapped in the further, unable to cause harm again. For the first time in years, Elise felt at peace. She had closed a chapter of her life that had haunted her since childhood. She reconciled with her brother Christian and gave him a whistle that their mother had given them as children, a symbol that they would always be connected. Before leaving, Elise had one final vision. She saw a boy named Dalton Lambert, trapped in the further alongside the red-faced demon. At that moment, she knew that another battle was on the horizon, one that would lead directly into the events of Insidious. Chapter 1. With that, Elise closed the door to her old house, knowing that she had finally conquered her greatest fear. And now that we've covered her story in depth, I want to talk to you about KeyFace's physical appearance, what we know about its personality and behavior, and I'll explain its incredible abilities and known weaknesses. KeyFace is one of the most terrifying entities in Insidious, the Last Key. It is a humanoid creature, but its body is thin and elongated, giving it a cadaverous and unnatural appearance. Its skin has a pale gray, almost ashen tone, with a rough and aged texture, similar to that of a decaying corpse. Its limbs are long and skeletal, giving it a predatory air. Its face is elongated and sinister, with sharp, bony features. Its skin appears stretched tightly over its skull, accentuating its prominent cheekbones and thin jaw. Its eyes are hollow and dark, with no visible pupils, giving it a spectral and menacing look. It has no visible lips. Instead, its mouth appears as a deep crack in its face, with sharp teeth barely visible in the darkness within. One of its most disturbing features is that its mouth can open in an unnatural way, as if its jaw could fully unhinge. Its hands are long and bony, but the most terrifying aspect is that its fingers are shaped like sharp keys. Each finger seems to be made of rusted metal, with different designs resembling ancient keys. Its key-like fingers are not only used to open doors in the Further, but also to seal the throats of its victims, robbing them of their voices and trapping their souls in the afterlife. The most prominent finger is the index, which is elongated and ends in a large key used to lock and manipulate its prey. Unlike other entities in Insidious, KeyFace does not wear visible clothing. Its own skin seems to act as a natural garment. It has a deteriorated and ancient appearance, as if it has existed for centuries in the Further. Not only is its physical appearance terrifying, but its presence also generates an overwhelming feeling of despair and fear. When it appears, the atmosphere is filled with an unnatural silence, as if all sound is being absorbed by its presence. Victims under its influence feel their voice and will being stripped away, further reinforcing its control over them. The design of KeyFace carries a strong symbolic meaning. The keys represent control and power. It does not just physically imprison its victims. It silences them, manipulates them, and traps them within the Further. KeyFace is not just a terrifying entity because of its appearance, but also because of the way it acts and manipulates its victims. It does not simply attack its victims physically. Instead, it plays with their minds, trapping them in a state of desperation and vulnerability. It delights in watching its prey lose their voice and their ability to defend themselves, allowing it to dominate them completely. KeyFace does not merely trap souls in the Further. It turns them into slaves, leaving them imprisoned in a limbo of fear and despair. It does not seem to follow any demonic hierarchy. It acts on its own and answers to no one. Unlike the red-faced demon who seeks to possess human bodies, KeyFace focuses on capturing souls and subjugating them. Its presence is so powerful that even other entities avoid confronting it. KeyFace is one of the most powerful entities within the Further, possessing unique abilities that set it apart from other demonic creatures in Insidious. It can seal its victims' throats with its key-shaped finger, preventing them from speaking, screaming, or defending themselves. This not only silences them, but also makes them more vulnerable psychologically. It can lock spirits inside rooms and keep them imprisoned in its own domain. It prefers to weaken its victims mentally before attacking them physically. It appears in their nightmares or distorts their perception of reality. It causes hallucinations or feelings of oppression, making its victims believe there is no escape. It can move freely within the Further, appearing in different places undetected. It is not bound by physical space, allowing it to travel without restrictions. Although not its primary ability, it possesses great strength when it chooses to attack physically. It feeds on fear and despair, which can make it grow stronger. Elise was able to fight against it in the Further, proving that it is not completely invulnerable. When Elise confronted her trauma and became emotionally stronger, she regained her voice and her power, weakening the demon. This implies that its control over victims is not absolute and can be broken if the person overcomes their fear. Light, both literal and symbolic, can weaken its influence. When Elise and her allies manage to bring hope or illumination to the situation, its dominion begins to crumble. Unlike the red-faced demon, KeyFace does not seem capable of crossing into the physical world on its own. It needs to influence mediums or sensitive individuals to open portals. Without a connection to the real world, its reach is limited. There is a theory that suggests if KeyFace can manipulate and silence the living, it may have played a hidden role in the Lambert family's story without anyone noticing. Elise was the medium who helped Josh Lambert as a child, but her encounter with KeyFace when she was young could have affected her connection to the further and her way of dealing with demonic entities. If KeyFace had influenced the bride in black, then it was indirectly responsible for Josh's trauma and the events of Insidious 1 and 2. KeyFace has an obsession with manipulating the living, and in Insidious 1, we see how Josh's grandmother mentions that he was being watched since childhood. Could it have been KeyFace who started the entire cycle of terror? And that would be everything we know so far about the entity known as KeyFace. Honestly, this demon seemed really terrifying the first time I saw it, and I never expected what would happen next or how they would manage to defeat it. But I truly enjoyed learning about it and its story. Now, let me know your opinion in the comments. Did you already know about KeyFace? Do you think such a sinister and malevolent entity could really exist? And finally, if you ever encountered this being, would you be able to run away or hide from it? Share your answers to these questions and your general thoughts on KeyFace from the Insidious universe. As always, thank you so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed it, share it to support the channel, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of my new videos.